Yeah, so one of the figures who I think has been really misread and who I have a kind of personal interest in because he was a friend of my mother. In fact, they used to deal drugs together, smacking stuff, is Alexander Trocchi. Not so many literary writers you can talk about as drug dealers as well. I always kind of think of Trocchi, writer, revolutionary, drug dealer. And I find it really interesting the way that people talk about Trocchi writing these two literary novels, Young Adam and Cain's book, and then kind of treat him as though the rest of the books were porn and they're two separate things, because the way that breaks up what Trocchi wrote, and that's only the fiction, not the kind of incredible essays like Invisible Insurrection of a Million Minds, which is an absolutely stunning piece of kind of rhetoric and writing, kind of galvanising the London Underground. But when you look at that breakup, it doesn't work of the books, the ostensibly fiction books, it doesn't work at all. For one thing, Cain's book is fictionalised autobiography. I mean, it isn't autobiography, and it isn't quite fiction. It operates in this really interesting grey area. I don't think you can read it straightforwardly as autobiographical. But it clearly is distinct from the other books. But where that division falls down is with bracketing Young Adam with Cain's book, because what clearly happened was Young Adam was originally published alongside all the other porn like Thongs, Helen and Desire, White Thighs. And when it got republished as a literary novel, Trocchi took out some of the porn. He in fact left in this famous sploshing scene where the narrator has admitted that he knew the girl Kathy, whose body has been found in the canal. And he then describes his life with her, and he describes this day. She was supporting him, trying to be a writer, and he can't write, so one day he spends the day making custard, and it's the best custard he's ever tasted, and she comes home and she wants to know why she's slaving away for him when all he's done is make custard, and he loses his rag, the narrator, because she won't taste the custard, and then throws the custard over her, then kind of throws ketchup and brown sauce and all this other crap over her, thrashes her with a plank of wood, and then has sex with her. And that's quite a kind of, porno brutal scene. It's quite comic. And again, I think it's very much there to emphasise the fact that Trocchi's narrator in Young Adam is very much an unreliable narrator. You can't believe what he says. And I find a lot of the description of that book really, really odd, because you see it described as an existential thriller. Well, it's definitely not a thriller, because you don't wonder whether the hero is going to get away with what you suspect is murder. You can't be sure of, because he claims he was innocent, that Kathy died accidentally, and at the same time he ends up going to the trial of the guy falsely accused of murdering her, who ends up getting sentenced to death. There's no kind of suspense in that, so it's not a thriller. I also think if you look at it in light of particularly White Thighs, and it's using a lot of the same kind of narrative techniques, I think it's much more a parody of existentialism than an existential book. I don't think Trocchi is dealing with it straight. I think he's moving beyond existentialism, and a lot of his work has suffered from Young Adam being kind of severed from the context of the other porn novels in which it was produced, which would kind of give you a kind of truer reading of what the book's about. And two, Trocchi being seen as this protege of Samuel Beckett, who, in certain senses he was. Obviously, Trocchi was important in getting Beckett published in English, producing Merlin, not just Beckett, but the English publication of people like Jean Genet, etc., etc. But he then gets associated with a lot of these late modernist figures, and I do think this is where you have this really kind of interesting grey area starting up, where is Trocchi actually producing modernist or postmodernist literature, if you want to use that kind of division? And I'd say if you are using that division, he's actually a postmodernist, not a modernist, so his kind of association with the older literary figures in Paris leads to this misreading of his work. And then he gets compared a lot with the kind of Nouveau Roman, which appeared in France slightly after the first publication of Young Adam, associated with people like Alain Robbe-Grillet, Claude Zaman, and Nathalie Sarraute. But actually, I think you can really usefully read Trocchi in that kind of unreliable narrator. On the one hand, in a very subtle way, next to someone like Lynn Tillman, who actually knew Trocchi briefly in London in around 1969, 1970, when she came over, having just finished at Hunter College, done a degree and came over to Europe. And then on the other hand, very kind of obviously with kind of Bret Easton Ellis and American Psycho and that kind of, again, that unreliable narrator that you've got going on in Ellis's books, particularly, famously American Psycho. So I think Trocchi as a writer is very kind of misread and misunderstood, and it's worth going back to him through the prism of reading all the pornography, and not treating kind of Young Adam as separate from that and kind of lumping it with Cain's book, but actually treating Cain's book as the exceptional book. Not that I'm knocking Cain's book, I enjoy it, it's a good read. But I think it's something else which, and again because of this kind of mix of fictionalised autobiography, is very much a postmodern work, but very different in style from the other novels.